Welcome back, Canonites, as we once again dive into the campaign of Halo Infinite. Last time, we went over events detailed in the audio logs discovered during the campaign, most of which are set prior to the campaign's beginning. Basically, if you want a better idea of events leading to Infinite and during the 6 months the Chiefs spent floating in space, check out Part 1. For those ready for Part 2, however, let's dive in. During the evacuation of the Infinity, as UNSC forces scramble to provide defense or evacuation to Zeta Halo, a civilian volunteer, Fernando Esparza, manages to escape in a Pelican, Echo 216. For 6 months, Esparza remained in the Pelican, hoping he might find a way home. Just as his last hope seemed to disappear, the Pelican's computer detects a friendly UNSC signal, the Master Chief. Bringing the Spartan aboard, Esparza uses the last of the Pelican's power to jumpstart Mjolnir's fusion reactor, which in turn feeds power into the Pelican. Expecting a ticket home, Esparza is shocked to find the Chief seemingly ignorant of the UNSC's loss months ago. Before they can talk further, however, their Pelican is caught in a Banished tractor beam. The Chief, naturally, prepares to do what he does best. Heading out into the debris field surrounding the Pelican, the Chief makes his way towards the Banished vessel trying to capture the Pelican, a Banished dreadnought known as the Ghost of Gabrakan. As he does, we find the Chief often carefully moving past UNSC bodies, showing them the respect due to a fallen comrade, juxtaposed with his more, let's say, casual treatment of Covenant corpses. Moments like this permeate the game and really help characterize the Chief in ways that simply telling the player could not. During this sequence as well, it's discovered that the pistol the Chief was provided with by Esparza only had one bullet in it, which has some fairly dark implications, especially given the state the pilot was in when the Chief awakens. Upon boarding the Gabrakan, the Chief quickly goes to work eliminating Banished soldiers while making his way to the bridge, where he plans to shut down the stasis beam, bringing the Pelican in. The titular warship, incidentally, is named after a territory of the same name on Doisak, the Geralhani homeworld. This region was where the Battle of Gabrakan took place, the battle occurring not long after the conclusion of another conflict, the First Immolation. The First Immolation was a massive global war among the Geralhani that occurred not long before the Covenant found the species. Fun fact, the Gabrakan region was first mentioned back in 2011's Halo: The Essential Visual Guide. Given what we discover later in the game, I've been wondering if other dreadnoughts in the Banished fleet at Zeta Halo, such as Ghost of Lodone or Ghost of Tiakoro, might have been named after regions and territories from Doisak, a reminder of home and of what the Banished are fighting for. Remember, the Banished plan to make Zeta Halo their new home. Inside the ship, we're immediately greeted by tons of scrap and junk, all being processed and repurposed for the Banished war machine. It's beautiful visual storytelling that I always deeply appreciate. As John moves through the ship, we get to see what this scrap is being repurposed into, at least in part: bases and deployment pods. And fun fact, the announcements over the speaker in this moment mention both power extractors and sensor towers, both Banished base constructs from Halo Wars 2. We obviously never see these in-game, but it's a cool Easter egg for attentive fans. As the Chief arrives at Gabrakan's bridge, we're greeted with a speech from Eshram formally introducing the War Chief as he speaks to his Banished forces via hologram. He calls out to Atriox beyond the grave, almost like a preacher giving an impassioned sermon, which really points out how different Eshram's leadership is compared to Atriox. Atriox led with a combination of charisma and intimidation, able to appeal to reason on one hand, while ready to strike mercilessly with the other. Eshram, on the other hand, leads by mythologizing their fallen leader and making himself out to be the one that keeps Atriox's dream going. Anyway, the Chief goes to work clearing the bridge before attempting to shut down the stasis beam. When doing so isn't an option without some kind of hack, he goes with the old reliable plan B, blow everything up. Which he does by destroying nearby cooling pipes and then firing the ship's engines at full throttle. As the ship begins to destroy itself, Eshram appears once more. Initially upset, the sight of the Master Chief, the once feared demon of the Covenant, savior of humanity, delights the old War Chief. As we see later on, the Master Chief's return reinvigorates Eshram, the War Chief excited about the potential of one last challenge, one that would solidify his own legend. Back on the Gabrakan, the Chief runs for the hangar to meet up with the pilot, taking the Chief through one of the coolest sequences in a Halo game, the two only barely escaping the ship as it's destroyed. As the Chief awaits recovery from the pilot, a series of messages flash across the Chief's visor, informing him of a message and a location. After being recovered by the pilot, the Chief first inquires the Pelican onboard AI about the status of the Infinity and her crew. The AI reports a devastating 1,986 deceased UNSC service members within the surrounding space. After that, the Chief connects to the ship's systems to investigate the message that flashed on his visor earlier, discovering an encrypted message. I suspect, by the way, that message to be the one we see at the end of the campaign after defeating Harbinger, but I digress. When the message can't be decrypted, the Chief has the AI track the source and bring the Pelican there. The pilot is obviously very upset, desperate to go home, but we know how the Chief is. When he's set his mind on a mission, he gets it done. Dropping off as close to the signal as possible, the Chief begins to make his way through Banished forces, one bullet at a time. Something to note here is how direct the Chief is. He's much closer to his depiction in the classic trilogy, barely talking, only speaking as much as necessary and not a word more. Of course, this isn't without reason. His regression of sorts is the result of the Chief's broken trust. He's more reserved and insular now, setting up for his character arc later on. While the Chief is doing his thing, Eshram makes his own preparations. In the wake of the Gabrakans' destruction, Chieftain Tremonius, the Jiralhanae who led the attack on the Reverie and captured the outpost, begins questioning Eshram's leadership, noting how the Banished are just as trapped on Zeta Halo as the Chief and pilot. However, with some encouragement from Blade Master Jega Erdamnai, he soon calms down, ordered by Eshram to await the Chief. At the same time, Jega, an old friend of Eshram's, is dispatched to shadow the Spartan. Meanwhile, the Chief makes his way deeper into the underbelly of Installation 07, where he begins to hear whispers, what we later learn are leftover data from Cortana. Finally, the Chief comes to a chamber filled with silexes, the signal he's tracking at the center of the room. Now, when I got to this part of the campaign, I was simply blown away. Never in a million years would I have thought to find silexes in a Halo game. First appearing in the collection of anime shorts known as Halo Legends, silexes were just thought of as some deep lore artifact that would likely never appear again, certainly not in a game. But here they are, looking better than ever, and wonderfully adapted for the game. Though we see many varieties later on, the silexes surrounding the weapon are all human, almost as if keeping her company and/or guarding her. Given how much of Halo Infinite was orchestrated by Cortana, that may well be the case. Hell, we even hear from the weapon later that the silexes talked a lot, whatever that means. Anyway, the Chief approaches the room's center, finding the AI known only as the weapon greeting him with a chipper attitude. The Chief, however, is all business, asking after the fate of Cortana. The weapon reveals that Cortana was successfully deleted, though how remains unknown to either of them. The fact the weapon is still around too is odd, as the AI was supposed to be deleted as soon as Cortana was locked down. The weapon, believing their mission is complete, tells the Chief to delete her, but, well...
The missions change. They always do.
Let's just say the Chief has a way with words. Interestingly, his speech here seems softer, more considerate, especially considering how the conversation starts, or even his interactions thus far with the pilot, a first glimpse of the human beneath the armor. After extracting the weapon from the ring's systems and plugging her into his armor, a Forerunner elevator activates an automated response from the ring. As the platform moves, we hear more data streams from Cortana, including a few of Halsey's logs concerning a young John 117. When the Chief asks about these voices, the weapon calls them leftover data cycling, just dust and echoes. This is the first hint to those who aren't aware about the true nature of the weapon, and more than the pointless nostalgia bait that I feared it to be pre-release. Fighting through more Banished and encountering more detailed holograms, the pair eventually discover what turns out to be a fragment of the weapon, specifically, the framework meant to capture Cortana. As she interacts with the data, we're treated to a recreation of the Chief and Cortana's first meeting, once again stylized for the sake of presentation. For anyone like me who was at all bothered by how events were altered from their original depictions, you can chalk it up to Cortana's doing. Remember, these moments aren't just for the player, but for the Chief and weapon as well. After reabsorbing the data, the pair continue to move through Zeta Halo to find a way to the surface. When the weapon is brought back into the Chief's armor system, we see a series of failsafe protocols, known as System Peril Distributive Reflex, or SPIDER for short, flash across the Chief's HUD. These are anti-intrusion protocols implemented following the created uprising seen in Halo 5, showing the distrust of AI the UNSC now holds. Every time the weapon is loaded back into the Chief's Mjolnir, she's essentially locked down, scanned, then reinitialized. Once inside the Chief's Mjolnir again, she also notices the encrypted file mentioned earlier, though when she asks the Chief about it, he immediately moves on to the subject of escape. Fighting through more Banished, the pair soon come across their first Spartan casualty, though not the last. This was Spartan Bonita Stone, killed just a month earlier by Spartan killer Jega Urdamnai. Collecting her advanced shield module, the chief gives the Spartan what consideration he can before moving on. Fighting more Banished and passing a few more Silexes, including one containing a flood pod infector of all things, the pair are confronted by Tremonius. The chieftain is easy work for the Spartan, allowing him and the weapon to finally make their way to Zeta Halo's surface. Emerging into Banished outpost Tremonius, the two first find a lone Spartan core for the chief's Mjolnir armor, and soon, another Silex. This is, of course, the Silex that once held the Zalanin known only as the Harbinger. Moving deeper into the base, the pair are once again confronted by Eshram in hologram form, before finally emerging onto Zeta Halo's surface. Clearing out the local Banished, the weapon is able to remove the outpost's location from the Banished systems, hiding it, at least digitally. With that, the pilot is able to land and meets the weapon soon after. I absolutely love the character interactions in this game. After calming the pilot and explaining the situation, further discussion is cut off when the weapon detects a UNSC signal to the south, coming from, we learn, the tower belonging to Chak Lok. Loading into the Pelican, the chief and weapon decide to investigate the signal. On the way, the weapon asks why Cortana had to be deleted, what she did wrong, but the chief refuses to give any details. When pressed, he uses the excuse that Halsey only tells people what they need to know, attempting to shut down the conversation. While certainly in part the result of security protocols, the chief's reluctance to open up is far more personal. The cutscene comes to an end as the chief is dropped off, or I suppose drops himself off, and the game's open world starts to become available. Here is where describing and exploring Halo Infinite really starts to get difficult, since there's such a degree of freedom to what the player can decide to do. For the sake of presentation, I largely won't be touching on side missions like FOBs and marine rescues except in large strokes. While the specifics might be sparse for now, to our knowledge, the chief does go out of his way to rescue these marine forces and establish bases for them to operate out of. So, after establishing a forward operating base or two, maybe grabbing some marine support, the chief makes his assault on the structure known as the tower. Chak Lok initially tries to lock the chief out, hoping reinforcements will eliminate the Spartan, but they're no match. After eliminating the forces outside and freeing some marines, and with the help of the weapon, the chief is able to enter the tower. And the first thing he finds is the source of the distress beacon, the armor of Spartan Hudson Griffin, the man who had tried his damnedest to rally the survivors of the UNSC Infinity over the last 6 months. The chief collects the Spartan's threat sensor module, then continues deeper into the tower. Eventually, he finds Griffin, barely alive and held in containment, a trap for the Master Chief. Unfortunately for Chak, he's simply the next Sangheili to fall at the chief's feet, especially with Griffin's threat sensor. After the fight, the chief helps Griffin out of his restraints, but the Spartan is sadly too far gone. He passes just after informing the chief about a dig site to the north where the Banished are looking for a place known as the Conservatory. At this point, the order of events gets incredibly subjective outside of key story missions, so I'm just going to hit on the stuff in the order I did everything. In other words, don't consider the order of side missions as presented here to be any sort of hard canon on the matter. So, with that in mind, the chief first heads south to eliminate Ransom Keep, a hardware reclamation and fuel depot, along with a high-value target, Okro Vagadoon. Ransom Keep would fall fairly quickly, Master Chief and the weapon making short work of the base and freeing more UNSC prisoners. While it's not shown or strictly indicated in the games, I'd like to believe that these captured Marines are making for FOBs, where they resupply and await further orders. Further to the south, Chief finds Okro Vagadoon, once one of the Covenant's deadliest warriors and now part of the Bloodbrave, a banished sect of highly skilled and capable warriors. However, even with a contingent of warriors backing him up, Okro falls, the first of many. In the wake of the Blade Master's defeat, the weapon is able to scan his specialized energy sword, the Duelist Energy Sword, sending the data to the UNSC weapon benches at their FOBs so the weapon can be recreated for later use. And from there, the chief heads back north. After eliminating a particularly ruthless grunt, Bip Bap the Vanquisher, the chief smashes through a Banished blockade attempting to keep him from crossing back into the Northern Territory. Once across, though, the chief goes to work freeing more UNSC Marines and recapturing FOBs, establishing a network of bases to make fighting the Banished all the easier. Additionally, the chief eliminates several Banished outposts, slowing their overall progress. The first of these bases was the Redoubt of Sundering, a prisoner processing station that would eventually send prisoners of war to the tower. Like many of these outposts, there are interesting pieces of dialogue that a player can hear while laying down destruction. One of my favorites from the readout was a note about how prisoners marked for processing are not for eating, and that the Banished specifically have humans marked for eating. It's nothing new to learn that certain Covenant species, though especially Geralhani, enjoy eating humans, but it's nevertheless unsettling to hear it. As the Chief finishes his clearing of the readout, he finds a Marine squad leader imprisoned in the base's central structure, one of the few moments like this in the game. From there, the Chief moves on to the Forge of Tish, another maintenance and fuel depot used to supply the Banished excavation site. This outpost is named for Tish, one of Doisak's 3 moons. Once more, the Chief makes quick work of the outpost, though it's currently unknown whether the outpost's commander, a chieftain named Durakus, survived the fight. Next comes the Horn of Abolition, an apt, if morbid name given that all the Banished seem to be abolishing is the human presence from the ring. The Banished's primary communications array, the outpost was vital in coordinating Banished operations and hunting down remaining UNSC signals. As noted in the last episode, the outpost came under previous attack by some Marine survivors, who destroyed part of the outpost with C-12-shaped charges, the result of their actions still visible in-game. The Chief, luckily, is able to destroy the Horn's broadcasting antenna, destroying the nerve center of the Banished comm network. Finally, the Chief moves on the Armory of Reckoning, an outpost that produces the new munition boxes we find in Halo Infinite. By the time of the Chief's assault, only 3 ammo printers remained, all of which were quickly eliminated. Now, the Chief could concentrate on the excavation site. Though before that, I do want to talk just a bit about the new ammo crates found in Infinite. When I was first playing the game, I assumed these crates weren't 100% canonical, especially given how varied ammo for kinetic weapons can be. These guys are meant to cover everything from the BR to the Mangler to the Hydra, which aren't exactly similar. However, the Armory of Reckoning seems to imply that these are real in-world items, which somehow have the tech to print out ammo for a wide variety of weapons. Which, given that it's 2560, isn't all that unbelievable, but I just wanted to discuss this in brief. Still, it blows my mind that a single crate can supply rockets for the Spanker and 50 cal rounds for the sniper rifle. I'm hoping the new encyclopedia talks about that stuff in some more detail. Anyway, with that long-ass tangent out of the way, let's continue with the adventures of Master Chief and the Weapon. Arriving at Site Novum, the Banished excavation site, the Chief and Weapon find it oddly quiet, devoid of activity. However, the site soon lights up with activity. Attempting to shut down the mining laser in order to enter the conservatory, the Weapon finds that she can't for some reason, so the Chief goes with the old reliable plan B, blow it up. The Weapon highlights cooling pylons for the Chief to take out before returning to the mining laser's controls. Before the Chief can finish the job, however, he's ambushed by a chieftain named Bassus, who may have the best character introduction in the Halo games.
Spartans not so tough, I think. Break open easy. Soft inside?
Gods, I love that. Naturally, the Chief makes quick work of the chieftain, allowing him to then overload the mining laser systems and finally make his way into the conservatory. As they enter, the Weapon notes that the mining lasers had been modified to cut into the ring, another hint at the Harbinger. Soon after entering the conservatory, though, the Chief and Weapon discover the body of Spartan Vedrana Makovich, another Spartan felled at the hand of Jaga Urdamnai. As before, the Chief grabs her armor module, a drop wall in this case, and then has to move on. Deeper into the conservatory, the Chief and the Weapon encounter 117649 Despondent Pyre, monitor of the installation, who strangely has the body of a sub-monitor rather than a normal monitor carapace. Anyway, she requests help from the Chief and the Weapon, but is soon ambushed and taken by a new enemy, what we come to call Skimmers, and more properly known as Gasgira. Chasing after the monitor, the Chief makes his way past more Banished, hearing the cries of the monitor as she's interrogated by a yet unknown figure, at least for the Chief and Weapon. When the pair finally find Despondent Pyre again, her carapace has been opened, and her encephalon removed. Something I've been wondering since this scene, and especially after the end of the game, is whether Despondent Pyre is actually gone or not. It seems like her brain, so to speak, is intact, and surely her body could be reformed or even replaced, so is she really gone for good? In Halo Point of Light, when the main characters visit Installation 07, obviously prior to Halo Infinite, they're told by Sub-Monitor Adjutant Veridity that Despondent Pyre was, quote, everywhere and nowhere. Veridity never expanded on what that meant, but it makes me suspect that Despondent Pyre isn't gone, at least not entirely. Anyway, upon approaching the Monitor's now empty carapace, the Chief and Weapon are treated to another of Cortana's messages, this one depicting a conversation between Cortana and Despondent Pyre just before Infinity arrives. Again, this might not be exactly how events played out, but the scene does show that Cortana at least knew of the Silent Auditorium, possibly even about the Endless. As the memory comes to an end, a group of Gaskira appear and begin attacking, though the Chief is able to eliminate them with ease. Incidentally, if you ever wondered where the weapon got the name Skimmers from, as she drops the name during the fight, it likely comes from records from Spartan Griffin or other data collected during the course of the game. A later high-value target, Skimmer Alpha, was identified thanks to information originally from Spartan Griffin. It's possible this same data is where the name Skimmer came from. Continuing through the conservatory, the pair come across one more fallen Spartan, Theodore Sorel, who was felled by the brothers Tovaris and Hyperius. Collecting his thruster module, the Chief continues through the facility before coming face to face with the Harbinger. This first meeting always struck me as just a little strange, as the Harbinger initially seems like she doesn't want to fight, but never gives the Chief the chance to really do or say anything. Obviously the game has to happen, but still. So, the Harbinger disables the Chief's Mjolnir, which the weapon is only barely able to unlock. A brief scuffle between the Chief and Harbinger occurs, but the Harbinger overpowers the Chief and escapes, leaving the Chief and weapon to behold the first of Installation 07's Reformation spires as it emerges from the ring. And there, I think, will be a good place to stop for Part 2. The Chief and weapon have been brought together, the Harbinger has been introduced, and the Chief and weapon are prepared to put a stop to the new alien being's plans. There's a lot of content and information I either glossed over or didn't cover, such as the burgeoning relationship between the Chief and weapon, but rest assured, that is coming. So far, we've heard some light banter from them, such as when meeting Despondent Pyre.
What were those flying things?
New. Dangerous.
And Despondent Pyre?
New. Potentially dangerous.
See, you can be optimistic.
Or the Skimmers.
Where are all these skimmers coming from?
Is that what we're calling them?
Well, I was also considering flying octopus monkeys.
Skimmers it is, then.
But it's not much to write home about, not just yet. I will say, however, from a production standpoint, the character acting and interactions of Halo Infinite are probably the best in the franchise, both endearing us to the characters while setting up story arcs and moments that'll pay off down the line. And rest assured, we won't be glossing over those when that happens. For now though, this will conclude part 2 of the Halo Infinite story breakdown. Let me know your thoughts and questions in the comments below, and until next time, this has been Halo Canon. Thank you once again for watching Canonites. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, maybe even share it around, both of which help the channel. And if you aren't subscribed already, consider becoming a fellow Canonite and hitting that notification bell so you won't miss any future videos. Halo Canon now has a Discord server, which you can find linked in the description box below. If you like discussing any aspect of Halo's lore, well, that's what we specialize in. Thank you all once more, and keep on being awesome.